Carey Anne, welcome to Paper Napkin Wisdom. Excited to have you here with me today.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So you shared with me an interesting paper napkin. Could I ask you to read it out loud for everyone listening?
Sure. So I shared a paper napkin that had the statement, the future is female.
All right. So, bad news for me, I suppose, but maybe it's not. So tell me, why did you decide to share that with me today?
Sure. So I decided to share that with you because I am a female entrepreneur and in the field of data science, which is predictive statistics. So I feel particularly qualified to talk about the future of women in business. Yeah.
So let's talk about that. Data science, as all the sciences, are not considered female-led industries, right? If there was such a thing, it's hard for me to even think this way because I don't think there are male and female industries in terms of today's world. But you brought that up and you were specific about what industry you play in. Is that part of your journey?
Absolutely. So just speaking from personal experience, right? I've had both female and male leadership in positions above me that have guided me through my career. But I did notice something pretty early on, that most of those women were focused on research and analyses that looked at humans. They looked at poverty, children, health and human services. There are very few that were looking at things like advanced manufacturing or tech transfer. That still seems to be very much a male-dominated industry. And I've had direct experience with this after kind of coming out of the research world, where it has been a challenge to find female mentors that are experts in the disciplines that I care about or the things I care about. So yeah, absolutely. It's still a male-dominated industry. One other story, I also kind of teach on the side, and to my students, I always say, when you go out into this world, it is going to be a male-dominated industry. When you put your resumes into the marketplace, definitely negotiate. From my situation, I left a job because I realized my male counterpart was getting paid $20,000 more for the same exact position than I was. It happens. It's still very much a boys' club.
So so becoming an entrepreneur was a product of that, right? You felt that you could captain your own ship maybe a little bit better or differently than you were being available, or opportunities were being available to you.
That's right. Yeah. So I actually went back to graduate school before starting a company, and ended up, I had a really good option. I ended up at MIT and getting a master's in city planning. And I was talking to a friend who actually weirdly owned a solar lantern company in Somaliland. So totally separate from anything I do. And he was saying to me, you're struggling to find a place where you can go do what you care about. Why don't you just create it? And that was really the moment, the inspiration that sparked the business. Thankfully, MIT is a really supportive place to grow and to begin a new business. They've got a lot of...
Yeah, I've heard of MIT before somewhere. Yeah.
They have some supports. Some businesses come out of there occasionally.
Occasionally, yeah.
I don't know what they're doing. But yeah, so it was this seeking out of something that didn't exist, and because the structures that already existed were not supportive to my growth.
So when that reality for you clicked in, right, and the support structure around MIT, the peer group that you probably gained there, what was the genesis of that change in thinking for you? Where was the first step?
I think it really was that complaining, if that can be a thing, right? Like I wanted something to exist that didn't exist, and I was frustrated by it, and I was complaining. In layman's terms, I was bitching about it, and I was so complaining about it and felt so strongly about it that it was time that I knew I could do something about it. So I'm saying it very vaguely. What it is, I was realizing that city and county governments were releasing massive amounts of data, things like police reports, inspection results, permit requests, traffic crashes. And this data is largely available, I look mostly in US cities, across small and large, from New York down to Raleigh, North Carolina, up to San Jose, California. Most cities have this data nowadays, and yet very few of them were using it to operationalize decisions, to think about how to deliver public services more effectively and more efficiently. Very few researchers were looking at this data to think about, the effect of, or the interaction of, say, traffic crashes in poor neighborhoods, or blighted properties, and the emergence of gentrification in neighborhoods, even though the data could be brought to bear on those questions. Why not? Right? Why not? I was so eager to answer that question and create a solution to it.
So, one of the earlier napkins that was given to me was in order to be an entrepreneur, in order to be a leader, in order to start a company, you have to fall in hate with something, right? Right? It sounded like you sort of fell in hate with something.
Yeah.
I mean, not using hate in the angry, violent sort of way, but thinking about it more, that you saw something that really irked you.
Yeah, I do think that other things can be motivators, but at least in this circumstance, I was definitely motivated by something that irked me. Today, I'm motivated by a lot of the wonderful things that some cities are doing, right? Namely, we've replicated a project out of Chicago, Illinois, and I'm really motivated by the early advances that they were able to make and the investment that they made in doing something really meaningful for their residents. So I'm not always motivated by an irksome, but for sure in this scenario, I think I definitely was.
And where it started, maybe. So let's think about that now also, because you've talked about data science, a huge thing. I mean, everything from athletics to shoe manufacturing, to the coats that people wear, to even traffic patterns of pedestrians and people and hospitals. And I have a business that deals with predictive data as it relates to process efficiency in medical environments. So I mean, there's a wide gamut, but you've talked specifically about the city and urban element of that. How important is focus to you?
Absolutely. Focus is really important to us. We choose all of our projects that the business does. The business is called Open Data Nation. We choose all of the projects with the explicit purpose and function of improving health and safety in cities. It's very specific. And the reason is because we've already seen in data and data science that there's opportunities to use data for good. And there's opportunities to use data somewhat recklessly if you're not thoughtful and intentional about the projects you undertake. There are examples on both sides, right? We're doing a project to predict which restaurants are most likely to fail their health inspections. That's going to keep you safe from E. coli. It's also going to keep employees of those businesses safer from slips, falls, cuts, burns. It's also going to keep business owners more knowledgeable of the regulations that they're required to keep in order to maintain maybe their small business or family-owned business. Alternatively, there's a project about predictive policing, where they're calling people in and saying, we're watching you. They're more likely to get arrested for small crimes like crossing the street, jaywalking. And that's not the type of project we feel like is an appropriate project to undertake, because we are so focused on bringing societal benefit and change to cities in a good way. We're also a B corporation, so that's part of our mission and establishment and responsibility to investors, is that we not only consider those projects that are going to be lucrative for a company or create a company, but also those that are going to be beneficial for society.
Okay, so let's think about that filter that you've got up, right? This beneficial filter. You've gone the extra step and become a B Corp out of that. All of those things. Why has it been so important? I mean, give me an example of how that steered you away from a project and towards a project. Because I believe that every single time you say yes to something has to be defended by 1,000 no's. And you're sort of talking about that you said no to this other project because it distracted you. Give me a concrete example of how that played out.
Well, it plays out in all the projects that we pursue. It also plays out in the project partners that we pursue. So we intend to have a prevention function. It's a facet of data science that you can predict what's going to happen, so you can kind of get ahead of problems before they occur. We'd rather not use our results as a policing function, which they can alternatively be used at, right? The more you look at this data and understand trends, you can go out and be targeting folks. So a very discrete example is around housing, blight, and remediation. Many cities have data sets related to which of their properties are vacant. It's usually held by like a tax assessor because they're taxing those properties differently. And there's a project based out of Cincinnati. A really great company called Data Science for Social Good took on this project. And it could really go in two directions, right? You could use the results that predict which homes are most likely to be blighted and vacant to go out and target those homeowners who may be vulnerable, poor, unable to pay their tax bills. Or you could use it to proactively say, get commercial businesses back in line, to return vacant properties back to productive uses, to get banks to push those properties back onto the market if they're holding on to those. So again, it's predictive versus kind of a proactive approach to strengthening neighborhoods, strengthening communities, watching out for the health and safety of folks.
Yeah, so Carey Anne, one of the things I think a lot of people, especially, some of the medium-sized, small-sized business owners that are listening to Paper Napkin, they're saying, okay, well, big data and predictive data, I live in the margins of that. How do I take advantage of that kind of information? How do I use data in my business? How do I embrace that idea?
Yeah, I think it first starts with a cultural shift in let's talk about business first, right? If you work inside of a business that hasn't yet tapped into additional data sources that you think might be useful, I think first and foremost, it takes a cultural shift. And the cultural shift is thinking about and anticipating the future. If you are responsive all of the time to what were our sales like last quarter, who performed the best, and you don't think about perhaps yet what sales are going to look like over the summer months or in the winter time, or what kind of sales worked over the Christmas holiday and what can we think about doing again this year. Predictive statistics is like so foreign, it's an alien might as well have dropped into your office, right? So first and foremost, figure out ways in which to talk about the benefits of predictive statistics to your company, and then pursue doing the technical components of that business, or technical components of data science. So when we talk to city and county governments, we don't walk in the door and say, hey, we're here to bring predictive statistics to Dallas, right? No, we say, hey, what are your pain points? What kind of things are you overwhelmed with? Many cities struggle with, the benefits of economic growth is that the public services they provide become strained as demand increases. So what kind of demand issues are you facing? In the example of the restaurant inspections, more restaurants are opening every day in Austin, Texas. How are you keeping up? Do you have to hire a lot more inspectors? Are places not getting inspected because that demand is so high? And when there's commitment to the problem and an understanding of how you might be able to get ahead of it, then you can introduce, and then we start talking about we have this tool that predicts restaurant inspections, and it doesn't seem so much like magic anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And I also like how you talked about how you articulate the value proposition by understanding the challenges of your client. I mean, I think that's a very subtle and important thing that you brought up there. Let's go back to your Paper Napkin and talk about, how, your understanding about, for you, the future is female. What has that meant for you as an entrepreneur? How have you used that as a leader now within your organization?
Yeah, so two quick stories, I guess. The first is, I talked about just walking into city county government. When I do that, I am now much more consciously aware, having had this company now for 2.5 years, about some of the predispositions or kind of conditions that people see me with. So I can walk into, and this is any business, so I'm not just targeting city and county governments, but I'm walking into a business meeting and I start talking about my value proposition, our product lines, And then by the end of the conversation, it might come up about my background, my expertise personally. And I say, well, yeah, I'm an MIT trained data scientist and city planner. And the reaction is always a lean back and a what? That can't be. Now, I've just spent an hour-long meeting with you talking about municipal data science. And yet still there's a precursor or a precondition. There's some training in your brain that makes you think there's no possible way that this person is both the business owner and understands their own business, which to me is mind-boggling. But the more you talk to folks, the more you are in this space, you realize that, and what I realized also is that we get a lot of applications for interns, for data scientists to join our team. At one point, we were entirely female, not by like hand selecting or thinking to discriminate men, but the most qualified, interested, motivated in a company that is doing data science for good are women. And they flock to this idea that they can bring together the technical skills that they know with an idea that they care about in a new discipline. It's almost like they're stepping out into the light. They're bringing together their care for people, this kind of, to come back around to what I was talking about before, a lot of them are in this data science industry, but in health and human services, childhood, education, poverty sector, and their technical skills into a new place where we're talking about inspections, traffic crashes, things and opportunities that they never had the opportunity before to explore. And they're so eager to do it. And it's so wonderful to see that eagerness that I had for this industry, this job, this company, Open Data Nation, in the eyes of a lot of women, frankly.
Yeah, it's there's a lot there, but I want to just go step by step. First of all, the predisposition, right? There's perspective of the people in the room. The people had a predisposition maybe to think of you as the business development person or the salesperson, and not necessarily the data scientist, right? Not the one with the pocket protector.
Yeah.
No, you're the one who protects the person with the pocket protector.
Yep.
And puts a shinier face on it.
Yeah.
For business development purposes, and I'm trying to put myself in that mindset, and it's difficult because I just find it personally I find it very foreign. But I understand that perspective exists. So thinking that perspective is truth and thinking about that from that point of view, I've always thought, and I've always had in all of my companies, senior team members who are women, because women come to things, and you're talking about it right now, women come to things with a perspective that I just do not have. And no matter how hard I try, I'm not going to get it. So the only way to get it is by asking questions and holding space for people to be able to fill that, and good people to fill that. So let me ask you very directly, for guys who are reading The Future is Female, right? What do we need to do that we're not doing?
That's interesting. I think becoming conscious and aware of the way that you're perceived as well is a great way to understand the female experience. You mentioned, and I'm surprised that you don't get a sense, or you don't confront that sort of training in folks when you walk into a room. I know a lot of friends who own businesses as well. And one comes to mind who says, before I go into big business meeting, I always shave my beard because I look a little bit more abrasive to folks. I look a little bit unkept if I have a beard. Now, I love my beard, but I always shave it before a business meeting. His conscious awareness, his sensitivity to other people's response to him, he can very easily understand the argument that I'm making, which is when I walk in, I get kind of laughed out of the room as the data scientist, because it's not about necessarily becoming or putting yourself in the mindset of a woman, but putting yourself in a position where maybe you are just a minority, whatever that means in that circumstance. You may be coming in from the outside. You may have a gender difference. You may have a racial difference. You may have an age difference. I walk in, I look super young. I tell people I'm in my 30s and they're totally thrown off, right? there's all types of sensitivities that people have predispositions for. So I think really just becoming more conscious of your own helps you be more sensitive and aware of others. I don't think that men should be worried that like women are going to take over the world. That's not our approach here. Not world domination is not the intention. Although I did read a scientific article that women could procreate without men, so maybe you should be a little bit scared. But that's not my long game anyways. I think my long game is really to have a greater seat at the table and invite more people to sit at that table with me. You mentioned it's still very much a male-dominated industry, and I see that changing. I see that changing with myself, and I see that changing the people coming behind me.
Yeah, and maybe I'm being specific about gender when I said the issue around perspective. I mean, I certainly get what it feels like to be a minority walking into a room.
That's why I was like, really? You don't?
but that said, I was asked recently. So I keynote a fair bit, and I was giving a speech to 75 people in a southern city in the United States, and there's a lot of turmoil around a lot of stuff like this right now, and they said, so how do you feel? And I said, I don't know. I don't feel like I've seen anything. That doesn't mean that it's not there, and I'm open to the fact that it's there, but it doesn't feel like I've seen anything recently. Clearly it's there. Clearly, I only need to turn on the television to see that it's there. So I'm trying to always live outside of my perspective to make sure that I'm aware of what else could be happening. But when I said it specifically, it was about a gender perspective, because to me, I've always been hungry to understand that female perspective, and I lose track of why in a room you could come across, as our conversation is right here, and me think of anything other than the fact that you are obviously all those things that you are. So in it, when you're saying the future is female, you're not saying and not male, right? Oh, it's absolutely. An open door. There's an open door for women today that you're saying that it is more so available than it ever has been.
Yeah, this is not a zero-sum game. I'm not like going out and being a male hater. Absolutely not in any way. But I do think that there is an opportunity for women to have a greater role. And when they do, businesses see a lot of benefits, right? Women-owned businesses tend to be, or I believe, and don't quote me, I hate to be like spreading false news, but I know I've read an article recently that early stage women-owned businesses more likely to get capitalized, more likely to be successful in early stages. And so they're actually better bets, in addition to just being more diverse and presenting different perspectives. So we're starting to see the tide shift that the guys at the boardroom table believe us and are taking a chance in us and are opening a door, because they're still very much our old white men, and that's okay. That's the situation we're in. But they're creaking the door open for us in a lot of ways. A lot of our mentors, I have about 10 kind of mentors, advisors for the business. I would say half to 3/4 of those are above 60 years old and would identify as white. They're the ones that I'm very thankful for cracking that door open for us, because while a number of other women on our advisory board are very intelligent and very high positioned, they haven't been in the boardroom in a lot of cases. I know I ramble here, but one other example that I think is really telling. I went to an all-girls Catholic high school in central Connecticut. My whole family had gone to that high school previous years, into public school, K-8, private high school. My mother went to that high school. My aunt went to that high school. My other aunt, all of my 9 cousins. My grandmother worked there in the cafeteria making cookies. Like, this has been a legacy of women in this school. Our alumni association, when I came out, when I went to university, I tapped into our alumni network and said, who's living in Washington, D.C.? That's where I went to undergrad. Who's in the industry that I care about? 0 people. What I was told was a lot of nurses, a lot of secretaries, a lot of home health workers, traditionally women industries, right? I went to the counterpart, the male boys school, right? The equivalent of the female school, but the boys school just up the road. How many people in Washington, D.C., in my industry? A plethora of connections. So it's not necessarily, I don't mean to be gendered, but there is a gender imbalance in the world that we face in boardrooms, and that we're going to need to acknowledge that and use those resources strategically to network.
I mean, it's a very simple equation for a data scientist to have to break down 0 versus any number. Let's talk about how important female mentorship has been to you, not just from the perspective of having them, but being one. I mean, you're blazing a trail now, and you have, I believe fundamentally that people who go first have an obligation to send the elevator back down, have the obligation to pay forward their failures and not just their successes, to help the next generation up. So talk about both sides of that.
Yeah, we've got some great female mentors. It took actively seeking out female mentors to get female mentors, I will say. I don't know if that's a unique experience to me, but how it played out, where we put out into the world, look, our advisory board is all men right now, and that's not okay to us as a business that's literally all women, that we have no female advisors. So we intentionally went out and put that into the universe, and thankfully folks heard it and pointed us to some really great women. The women advisors that we have, it's really interesting the different types of advice that we get. Of course, a lot of business advice, right? Business administration is its whole thing. Like, where do you go to file your taxes? What should you be concerned about with H-1B visas? Things like that are very technical, which advisors are great for. But the women businesses always, or the women advisors always push me to think more aggressively about how I'm going to make money. I will set out a business model and a business plan, and my female advisors will say, yeah, but you didn't think about monetizing this component that you could sell. Why not? This is a great business opportunity for you in addition to the one you're thinking about. They're not saying like your pricing is wrong, but they're really scrappy is the best way to say it, like super scrappy.
Looking for another angle, right?
Yeah, looking for another angle and encouraging us to not be so pigeonholed, to say like, you have to actively pursue making money from more places than you're currently considering. It's almost just like, yeah, you're doing great in this lane, but there are so many other lanes that you also have to simultaneously be swimming in, and they push you to do that. Whereas other advisors, I would say, less so. They're more focused on getting you good at what you're good at. They really push us outside of our box. On the flip side, I appreciate you calling me a mentor or an advisor. I never considered myself one, but I certainly check in with my team regularly. I teach in the evenings just to maintain some connection to folks in the industry. So I absolutely provide a lot of advice and a lot of mentorship over time. Some of the things that I've found as a business owner that I do may be different from others. I tell my team I love them all the time. I had a employee come to me and say, it kind of makes me uncomfortable that you say I love you. And I said, oh, well, thank you for bringing that to me. Like, why? And just let me know, like, if it makes you feel uncomfortable. Absolutely. So she's like, no. No one has ever told me I love you. And this is the first time. She comes from an Asian culture where that's not typical. She was like, I really appreciate that you appreciate us. Like, that is not normal. And, it was a real eye-opening experience to me to say that, like, I motivate my team, I inspire my team, I appreciate my team, and I make sure that they know that. It's definitely an interesting experience for me to be responsible for their well-being.
Yeah, and I can see it in your face. You're taking that very seriously. Yeah. I think it's really important. And this last point that you just made is so important, so vitally important. I think one of the greatest things that I've learned from the strong women in my life, the ones that I've been lucky enough to call teammate, teacher, mom, whatever it might happen to be, I think that I've learned that women have this innate ability to build our confidence through appreciation and love that is really powerful. And I think it's a very uniquely female characteristic. And if the future is female and that includes a little bit of that, I think that's something that everybody can get behind. Carey Anne, I think this was a great conversation. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah.
Time's up, but I can't believe it's gone this quickly. Beautiful conversation.
It's really been my pleasure. And to your point, I want men to share in that, both seeing ourselves as examples for others in a way that we can all live our lives with more love and more happiness. So I appreciate you giving me the stage and the opportunity to speak with you, and look forward to staying connected to your audience.
Likewise.